And we had this big long passage that we looked at last week. We're gonna read it all over again because we're picking up with the questions that we have to pick up with, and if we don't know the context of the verses, it'll be difficult to know what we're talking about. So, all right, so we're going to read these again. Who would like to read other than Kaylee? I know Kaylee wants to read. She just didn't know it, but she does.
I know it now.
Yeah. Mark, would you read? Well,
Sure.
We have you read, and you're always a candidate for reading, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Kaylee, we'll have you start, and and then we'll have Mark jump in. I'm not sure where we'll have you stop, so I'll rudely interrupt you, and we'll do it that way.
Sounds good. Galatians 1:11 through 24. For I would have you know, brothers, that the gospel that was preached by me is not man's gospel. For I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. For you have heard of my former life in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God violently and tried to destroy it. Thank you, sir. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people, so extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my fathers. But when he who had set me apart before I was born, and who called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son to me, in order that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately consult with anyone, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me. But I went away into Arabia, and returned again to Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas.
Yep, which is Peter.
And remained with him 15 days. But I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother.
All right, Mark, if you'll pick it up from there.
And when I am writing to you before God, I do not lie. And I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and I was still known in person to the churches of Judea that are in Christ. They only were hearing it said, he who used to persecute us is now preaching the faith he once tried to destroy. And they glorified God because of me.
All right, and Richard, give me Galatians 2:1 through 10.
Okay. Then, after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas. Taking Titus along with me, I went up because of a revelation and set before them, though probably for those who seem influential, the gospel that I proclaim among the Gentiles, in order to make sure I was not running or had not run in vain. But even Titus, who was with me, was not forced to be circumcised, though he was Greek. Yet because of false brothers secretly brought in, who slipped into to spy out our freedom that we have in Christ Jesus, so that they might bring us to slavery. To them we did not yield in submission even for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel might be preserved for you. And from those who seem to be influential, what they were makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality. Those, I say, who seem influential added nothing to me. On the contrary, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel to the circumcised, for he who worked through Peter for his apostolic ministry to the circumcised worked as through me for mine to the Gentiles. And when James and Cephas and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that was given to me, they gave the right hand fellowship to Barnabas and me, that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. Only they asked to remember the poor, the very thing I was eager to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Hey guys, welcome back.
Thank you.
you.
It's good to be back.
Wayfaring strangers. There's a stranger. No, stranger than who? How you doing there?
How you doing?
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
So we're going to go through this. We went through some of this, some of the questions last week, but so we're going to jump into question number 7 here. This is kind of Paul's autobiography, kind of given his whole background as he's now going to delve into addressing some of the false teaching that has infiltrated the message of the gospel, and he's kind of basically given his credibility. Right, this is what gives him the right to speak to this whole situation. So, what argument is Paul making as he describes his journeys after his conversion? We'll look at verses 17 and 18. Oops. Read those real quickly. Nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went away into Arabia, returned again to Damascus. Then after 3 years I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas, remained with him 15 days. So let's go back to that question. What argument is he making as he describes his journeys after his conversion?
I think part of it is his commitment. Like, he went out for 3 years before he even met with one of the apostles.
Okay. What do you think he was doing during those 3 years?
Sharing the gospel, letting people know about Jesus.
No.
No?
Let's go back.
All right.
Nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those apostles, but I went away into Arabia. Kind of went out into the wilderness. This is before, so this is some preparation time before he actually did his. Yours would have been a very logical thought there, but he actually is going out into the wilderness, and I would imagine when Paul says, for instance, that the message of the gospel that he's received directly from the Lord. I imagine some of these times in the desert in Arabia was times where he was getting to know the Lord, right? He was getting to know this message that he was about ready to share. So before he goes up to Jerusalem to talk to Peter, the other apostles, whatever, he's spending his time with the Lord and getting to know what his message is. I think there's some real important thought there, because you think of there's always a debate in terms of, well, does somebody have to go to seminary to be a preacher? I mean, well, technically no. Charles Spurgeon started preaching at 19, but interestingly, over the course of Spurgeon's ministry, he ended up creating a preacher's college. Right? So why did he do that? Because I think he found that education is important.
Yeah.
So now you could talk about levels of education, right? You have guys who are pastors who have a doctorate degree. I actually have a bachelor's degree. I don't have a master's. I remember I was in one church and some young girl looked at me and says, "You don't have a master's?" Like I was a stupid loser, basically. It was kind of the look on her face,
Wow.
And, well, maybe I am. maybe that's not up for debate. Thank you, Christian. But
Here to help.
No comment.
But I do think at some level there needs to be some learning before you're going to be doing some teaching
Yeah.
of some kind, right? And now,
Well, you can teach, but you might be teaching the wrong thing.
well, right. Well, that's it. And I think in terms of sometimes, looking at what's taught today in some pulpits, and I'm thinking, have you actually opened that Bible that you're randomly and rarely mentioning? Because if you did, you wouldn't be saying the things you're saying.
Yeah.
And when they do mention something, it's cherry-picked verses that are out of context. They chain together to make
Right.
it sound like a point.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and that's the difference between exegesis and eisegesis, right? Exegesis is taking the truth from the text. Eisegesis is inflicting your idea of truth onto the text, and then you go on a fishing escapade trying to fish for verses that'll back you up. And the real danger of that is now, instead of the authoritative voice of God speaking through His Word, it's you assuming that role of authority, speaking as if you are God, and you're not. That's scary. I can remember a sermon that I wrote, and I'm in the middle of writing, and I'm reading through my point, and I said, wait a minute. That's not what this is saying. That's what I want to say. I had to even check myself and say, I can't preach that. That's not what the text is saying. I will intentionally make myself a slave to the Scripture. I don't want to tell you that this is God's word for you and be lying. The only thing I can ever say is God's words for you is what is written in God's word. That's the authority. And you wander away from that, you don't have any authority. So, anyway, back to Paul. Here he is out in Arabia and spending some time in the desert. And I think, probably someday in eternity we can talk to Paul. What were those 3 years like? What happened? And I think that's kind of a lot of I think sometimes in terms of heaven is you can think of certain maybe Bible heroes. You get a glimpse or two in a story and a narrative account in Scripture. Man, I'd like to know more of the details of Daniel in the den of lions and some of these other great biblical stories. Man, I want to know more details. I want to bump into that guy at some point in eternity and ask him about that and how that was like and find out more details. But this would be one of those things, Paul, what was going on in Arabia? What was God teaching you? What were you learning? What were your struggles? Certainly he had amazing knowledge. Yeah.
So when it says, and returned again to Damascus, was he in Damascus prior?
So you remember, he was on his way to Damascus to throw the Christians into prison, right? And that's when he got knocked off his donkey and was blinded. This whole encounter with Christ and his salvation experience. So interesting. Damascus is the place where he came to salvation. After he goes to Arabia, he turns back to Damascus. I'm sorry. No, wait a minute. Let me read this again. Nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were possible, but I went away. That's right. Yeah. Sorry, went away to Arabia, returned again to Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem because of Cephas. So there's a process that God is bringing him through. You're going to spend some time in the desert. You're going to spend some time learning who he had all this learning of the Old Testament, but he needed to learn God, right? And God was revealing truth to Paul. How long that took, how God did that, I don't know. I wasn't there. Ken was probably there. But it's kind of what I want to pull out of that, though, is this idea of we need to be about learning the Word. We need to, we're none of us here are going to be the Apostle Paul. There's not going to be a reincarnation of any of the apostles, but God has people that he wants you to connect with and share the gospel with. God has people who are going to be part of your life that you're going to interact with. And we need to always be learning, always be growing in our understanding of the Word so that we have something to say. Always be ready to give an answer for the hope that is within you. Peter says that. That's important. So, and I love someone like Kaylee, who not only does she want to learn, but she wants homework. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. That's so cool. I found out she was disappointed in Nerds class I wasn't assigning homework.
Jonah told me there'd be homework, but he was joking, so.
He misled you.
Next Nerds class, we're going to have homework.
Yeah,
for you!
Well, thank you.
So many things we talked about. There was homework, because I had to go home and read all that, all the astrophysics, to try to understand it better.
Especially that solar system
Yeah.
stuff.
Oh.
Well, and it's funny because that particular class, you spend the rest of your life studying that and barely scratch the surface. There's so much to know. And I think that's part of it too, is you discover in your study over the years, and the older I get, I realize there are some things I'm just not going to fully get to. You have a small window, right? And the older you get, the smaller that window gets. It's like, okay, so how do I best use the amount of time I have left, and how much can I learn? And to be honest with you, that's one of the things that motivates me to write books. Is I only have so many years left. What am I going to leave? What am I going to leave for my children, for other people? Like, that becomes more, the older I get, the more those kinds of things become significant. All right, anyway, that's nothing to do with the passage here. All right. What argument is Paul making as he describes his journeys after his conversion, as well as his meetings with Peter and James? Let's just deal with the meetings with Peter and James. What does he say about them?
Well, James was the only one he's seen.
Well, at first he didn't see any of the apostles. Then he saw Peter and then James. Let's see here. Let's go back. Where was I? Then after 3 years, he went to Jerusalem to visit Cephas, that's Peter, remained there 15 days, and saw none of the other apostles except James. So he did go to see Peter and James. Why did he go and see them?
Because they were the Lord's disciple.
Yeah, and they were the heads of the church, right? So Paul's showing respect to church leadership. Paul's not going to be a guy who is going to be opposing church leadership. He's not going to be kind of this rogue apostle, right? There's an understanding of recognizing authority, recognizing the establishment of the church. Now, we do have an account where he talks about when Peter was wrong, he opposed him. But he also submitted to his leadership and recognized who he was. And boy, I think there's a principle there. We could stay on that a long time. It is so important that we recognize nobody in the church has the right to just, I'm going to do whatever I want here. If you have that mentality, you have a church that's headed for trouble. Okay? A pastor has no business saying, well, I'm in charge, I'll do whatever I want here. You do that, you've got a problem. I don't care, you're an elder, you're a deacon, you're a trustee, you're whatever, Sunday school superintendent, janitor, whatever. I don't care what you are. You have to recognize that God established the church. The New Testament gives very clear direction as far as the spiritual authority and leadership in a church. You can't just disregard that and think that that's going to be okay, right? We're always under authority, and that's something, because that's the way God created mankind that way. We need to be under authority, and even certainly Paul knew that.
Maintain order.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of like we respect we respect Christ as the head of the church, but then we see in Ephesians talks about and speaking of Christ, that he gave to the church. He gave apostles and he gave pastors and teachers. He gave these offices to the church to equip the church, to help the church, to lead the church. So there's leaders. Paul appoints elders, right? And then he gives directions for deacons. These things are given because that's the way God designed it to work. And so you have to have those things. However, you can't have someone in any of those positions that feels like, well, now that I'm in charge, I'll do whatever. I'll run the show here. No, you work together with the other leadership in the church, and that to me is so important. I can remember, I probably shared this. The older I get, Richard, this is what I do. I keep telling the same things. Be quiet, Christian.
Oh, just yawning.
Yeah. My voice has that effect. So, and now because I got sidetracked, what was I saying?
Yeah, the older you get, you say the same things over
Yeah,
and over.
I know.
Now, gone in the
Church
past, authority in the church, and
Yeah.
Okay.
doing what
That
people
Christian's a really nice guy, and he should stick around.
think. Yeah, but that's
No,
Christian Smith.
It definitely wasn't that. Definitely wasn't that.
You were talking about elders that could decide what they decide is how you do things.
Yeah,
They have authority.
and I think where I was going with that is,
You're probably going to tell a story.
I tend to do that. if you're leading the church, people ought to be generally inclined to go that direction. If the Lord's the one that's ultimately leading, right? If the Holy Spirit is in at work, in charge, and leading the spiritual leadership of the church, then there ought to be a progression of following that. If you have, I want to do this, and the entire church, I don't mean a few people, no, I mean like the rest of the church wants nothing to do with that. Pretty good indication, this is probably not the Holy Spirit leading you. This is you demanding your own way. Nobody has any inclination of going that way, but churches can get, and I would say there's oftentimes spiritual abuse that happens from spiritual leadership when they drag. There's a difference between leading sheep and dragging sheep, right? And sheep will follow, but if you drag them, what will they do? They'll kick their legs in and say, I ain't going there. And that's another one of those things where you have to work with the leadership God's given you instead of kind of pushing them around and just demanding your will. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. There's a working together, and if you're willing to do that, you get to see some really cool things happen. Now I'm going to tell a story. You're welcome, Christian. We had in the church in Connecticut, we had elders, and we would have a monthly elders meeting. Anybody could come to the elders meeting. Anybody. If the elders had something to discuss that was going on that was a confidential nature that they needed to discuss, then after the time where everybody was there, then the elders could separately continue to meet and deal with those issues. But everybody could come to the elders meetings, and we would talk about whatever was going on in the church and different ideas and whatever. And if you were a member of the church and you wanted to suggest something that a certain ministry idea or a thought, whatever, we'd listen to it. And so in this particular church, we did not have a baptismal tank. We had to bring one in. We had a guy, I actually had a pastor friend of mine from Massachusetts. He had a 15-passenger van, took all the seats out of it, and he would come to your door and deliver a baptismal tank, and it filled up the entire back of that van. And he'd take that thing out and he'd bring it into your sanctuary, whatever. And then there was another thing of steps on the outside of it, and you basically you would. When, in the course of a baptism, you'd step up those steps, and then you would step down into the tank, and it basically was kind of a long shelf on the bottom. You would turn around, sit down, just lean back and up. And I would stand on the outside of the tank, which was nicer because I wasn't completely soaked. So anyway, we had this elders meeting, and there were two ladies in the meeting there. They were not elders. They said, we would love to this time. Next, we had a baptism coming up. This time, we'd like to arrange our chairs because we had individual chairs. We didn't have pews. Why don't we put the tank in the middle of the room and put the chairs around the tank as a display of support to the people getting baptized? They wanted it to kind of physically represent that the church was surrounding them with encouragement, support. And we said, absolutely, let's do it.
So off target, but how did you fill and empty that tank?
Well, we put water in it.
How?
Getting the water in is the easy part.
Yeah, getting it out.
Yeah. We had a hose, and there was a
like an outlet at the bottom that you screw a hose onto. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank
Either
you.
that or buckets.
Subtopic, but
All right, everybody grab a thimble. So, next month, we're going to have a baptismal service. No. So anyway, it was the Saturday before the Sunday that we were going to have the baptism service. And my treasurer guy, who was the treasurer of my church, we were all, for some reason, there were a number of us at the church the day before. And I bump into this guy who's my treasurer, and he says, some of us have been talking, and, we really don't like this idea of having this tank in the middle of the room. And I said, well, you better be careful then what you're talking, because pretty good chance it's divisive and gossip. Because we already made a decision. The elders, with the cooperation of all of the members who were gathered there, we listened to these women who had an idea of ministry in this church, and we embraced that. We affirmed that, and I said, I don't care if I agreed with you. I don't care if I thought this was the dumbest idea in the world. We've already said that we're doing it, and I will fight to the death that we do it.
Keep your
Because I said, here's the question I want you to wrestle with. If we don't do this that we've agreed on, do you think in any future meeting ever again someone will feel free to offer something that they feel maybe the Lord's leading that would be a great ministry? Do you think anybody's going to offer any more ministry ideas?
No.
He said, well, I guess not. That's it. I said, so I can understand you might be concerned, but we're going to do this because I want people to feel free that they can come, we'll listen, and if we agree, we're going to walk together and support what you're doing. And we did, and it was wonderful. But
And I think it's even worse than that. I mean, people are going to lose faith in their leadership.
well, yeah,
Yeah.
because you can't be trusted. You can't
Right.
keep your word.
Yeah,
Right.
there you go.
And that is a very significant thing. Again, we're probably detouring from the lesson a little bit, but that's another thing that is so important in terms of leadership. You have to be able to keep, people have to believe that they can trust you to keep your word. And it's so significant. It is so important. Because if they don't, they'll just stop. They'll stop following your leadership. You may see people disappear from. I don't know why they left. Well, because you said things that you didn't live up to.
Yeah.
It's to me that's a really big deal. And I take this, I will admit, to a very anal point. Okay, I'll flat out confess it. One of the reasons we start on time is because I believe that it is about keeping my word. If I tell you class is at 9:30, it is about keeping my word to start at 9:30. It's even little things.
I love that, by the way, because I've been too many churches 10, 12 after, and it just becomes the norm. That's when people start coming. It's like,
Because they know they're not going to miss anything.
right,
They know, and they know that bottom line is that the start time really doesn't mean anything.
right.
Well, then what are we doing? Then if that doesn't mean anything, then I should start later. And then how much later do you go?
Yeah.
But to me, it comes down to keeping your word. Being late, there are people who are habitually late, and I guess my question is why. There's probably a reason somewhere in there. My sister, I could call her my late sister Kim. She's not dead. She just
Late.
she ain't late. She ain't coming. But it got to the point with her. I used to wait for her. Like we had a graduation party. Well, Kim's not here. Now I'm like, we're starting because who knows when she'll show up. Usually, whatever time she's supposed to be somewhere is when she leaves her house. I'm just like, I can't do this anymore. So, but anyway, and I don't want to harp on that all. That's not the point. But I will say, if you're in leadership, be diligent about things like time. Be diligent about things like what you say. Stick to it. Sometimes it's going to be difficult. I've made a point here in terms of like people on praise team. You can't be in an immoral relationship and be on the praise band. You can't do that. Well, if you're going to make a stand like that, I guarantee you it's going to be challenged. I've already dealt with that here. It wasn't fun. It was unpleasant. But you have to deal with unpleasant if you want to have something that's right and that's God honoring. You have to do that. And so, Paul's a guy who had to make really hard decisions. I mean, you read through the New Testament. Paul's not a mamby-pamby guy. You ever see that Geico commercial? I love it so much. Where would a drill sergeant make a good psychologist? Whatever. You see the guy, he goes, I feel sad, and he goes, yeah, you know what makes me sad? You do, you crybaby. I love that. Anyway, Paul was not a guy who seemed to tolerate nonsense very well, which is what we've already seen in the opening verses of Galatians, right? Who has bewitched you, you Galatians? What is wrong with you, you crybabies? But I do think, when you read what Paul did, he's a very strong character, and yet he respects the authority in the church. I think there's a lesson in leadership in Paul right there that is really important for us. If he's just a tough guy but doesn't respect authority properly, then he's just kind of some rogue, angry, arrogant, whatever you want to say. But he's not. He's also humble enough to recognize where authority is and where he needs to be in relationship with it. All right. That was a long detour. Let's jump back into the questions here. I'm sorry, let's see. What accusation from his opponents does he seem to be answering? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Well, didn't they say this is the guy that was, throwing us in prison and belittling our beliefs and all that, and now here he comes in just the opposite place.
I mean, that's absolutely true. I'm trying to think of the accusation from his opponents. From these, his opponents would be the Judaizers who were trying to infiltrate the church.
Well, isn't it he was hanging out with people that were uncircumcised? He was traveling with them.
True. Yeah.
Because it's said in here that they were trying to put him into slavery.
Yeah.
Whenever he was going around with what was it, Barnabas?
Titus.
Titus.
Well, he was. Yeah. He shows up with Titus, and
That was Titus. Yeah.
yeah, and we're going to talk about that next, which is a lovely discussion. What seems to have motivated Paul to visit Jerusalem? Chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Let's go back and read that. Christian, you probably would like to read that.
Oh, what is it? Which verses?
1 and 2. Galatians 2, 1 and 2.
Okay. Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. I went up because of a revelation and set before them, though privately before those who seemed influential, the gospel that I proclaim among the Gentiles, in order to make sure I was not running or had not run in vain.
Okay. Now, isn't that now, again, 14 years go by. He goes to Jerusalem because of a revelation that God had given him. But notice the respect. He privately brings that to the leaders of the church, and tells them what gospel the gospel he's proclaiming, to make sure I was not running or had not run in vain.
Kevin, is this a second visit then to Jerusalem?
This would be This is after 14 years he goes up again to Jerusalem. Yep. Mm-hmm. So there's good amount of time here going on in this.
And Paul had a revelation.
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Which probably said go to Jerusalem.
Well, I'm sure that was probably part of it. but the revelation I think he's referring to has to do with what he's preaching, because then once he gets there, he's saying, "This is the God. This is what I'm proclaiming."
Yeah.
So you're saying he went to the leadership in Jerusalem, the Christian leadership, and said, "This is what I'm going to preach."
Yeah.
And he was just looking for approval before he did so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, you see that respect for spiritual authority there. He's a person of authority, but he's a person under authority. Very important. Where are we? Okay, why was Titus an important test case for the interactions and confrontations he had there? Verse 3. Even Titus, who was with me, was not forced to be circumcised, though he was a Greek. So now we get into the stuff that Christian was mentioning. What accusation from his opponents does... Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I'm the wrong question. Why was Titus an important test case for the interactions and confrontations he had there? Who's Titus?
Jewish. He was
No,
Greek.
he was not.
Yeah.
Greek.
He wasn't circumcised.
And why does it matter?
Because they were trying to put him back under the law, but that would conflict with the message of Christianity of faith alone.
And again, we talked about this as well, but last week I believe we talked about this whole thing about him being uncircumcised. To us today, nobody's like, I wonder if that guy's been circumcised. Okay. No, that's not on our radar. We're not asking that. We're not thinking about that. We don't want to think about that. We don't want to talk about that. It's icky and whatever, right? Sharon, would you say that's icky?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's icky. So, but at that time, for the Jewish people, circumcision was the physical marking that you were set apart and belonged to God. And so the question came up here last week. Well, how do they even know? Well, because there were Greek baths where you'd go into the city, whatever, and you go to the bath, and all the guys are all naked. Well, there were those who were noticing that, hey, not circumcised, and these Judaizers want to make a big deal out of this. Paul's like, no. And the reality is, Paul's going to be making the argument, if you demand circumcision, you've abandoned grace, you've abandoned salvation, you've completely missed Christ. He doesn't make it a little thing; he makes it a big thing. I talked to somebody one time about Christians circumcising their children, and because we do this. Now, we don't do it because we're trying to follow the Old Testament law and whatever. But this person said to me, well, covering all my bases. Covering my bases? You missed the gospel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
completely.
If this is kind of a backup plan in case,
Jesus
we're
doesn't work,
in case we're supposed to be doing the circumcision thing after all, wait a minute. Go back and read your Bible. Read Paul particularly, because he's kind of militant about this.
Well, if you're covering all your bases, then you need to cover all religions. You need to
Right?
do your
Yeah.
prayers, bring your prayer mat with you.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Also, when you're covering all your bases, you're not really covering any of them.
exactly. You either know the truth or you don't,
Right.
right? And you need to know what that truth is.
Yeah.
So he describes the influence of the Judaizers that he confronted. How does Paul describe his ultimate victory in the midst of Jewish believers in Jerusalem? I'm going to go back in a moment here, but Titus was not convinced to be circumcised. On the contrary, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel to the circumcised, for he who worked through Peter for his apostolic ministry to the circumcised worked also through me for mine to the Gentiles. And when James and Cephas and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace was given to me, they gave the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and me, that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. Only they asked us to remember the poor, the very thing I was eager to do. So Titus was not convinced to be circumcised, and Peter and John give approval. That's very significant, because to the Judaizers, they need to know, hey, listen, this isn't just my idea. The church at Jerusalem, led by the leaders, Peter and John, absolutely perceived the grace that was given to me and gave the right hand of fellowship and said, you go to preach to the Gentiles, to the uncircumcised, preach the gospel that you've revealed to us that you're proclaiming. Go do that. And Titus is not going to be circumcised, nor does he need to be. Nor do the people in the churches in Galatia need to be that you're wrongly influencing.
In fact, it would have been wrong had he been circumcised.
Yes.
He didn't need to be. He shouldn't be.
That's correct. That's correct. Because the reasons that it would have been done would have been for religious reasons. That was the point.
Right.
Now, and again, I think for today, most people, I would imagine, I'm not a medical expert, although I do play one on TV, we circumcise our children generally, I believe, for health reasons and physical reasons, whatever. And that's a choice for every parent, and that's fine, that's great, and I don't want to know, and I don't care. But, if you are doing it because you're trying to fulfill the Old Testament law, you've got a problem, because that's not the gospel. That's not salvation. That's not Christianity. All right. How was this entire episode in Jerusalem a key affirmation of Paul's gospel ministry to the Gentiles, and how does this recounting of this incident further establish the credibility and legitimacy of his role as an apostle? Anybody can answer any aspect of that. We kind of already, I think, did. But if you want to say something profound after you're done yawning, Christian, you can do that.
I could.
Yeah.
Not going to.
Oh! I was so happy and excited for a second, and then it went away.
I'm excited to hear me speak that the first.
Come now. Anybody else? Profound things? Kaylee probably has something profound to say. No.
She usually does. She just likes to keep them inside.
Well, Paul was accepted by the leaders of the Christian church in Jerusalem,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, and it's so profound, particularly when you consider that he was the guy that was sending all these guys into prison and everything. But they had to be so terrified of this guy at first, and here they are giving him the right hand of fellowship. Yep, go for it. Yeah. All right, take a moment and read Jeremiah 1, 4, and 5. Under Paul's words in Galatians 1, 15 and 16, echo the words in Jeremiah. Why might this be significant? What might Paul be signaling about the significance and legitimacy of his gospel ministry and preaching? So I conveniently have both passages right here. Christian, would you like to read those?
I was almost there.
Do you have an aversion to reading off of the screen?
Yes.
Do you?
Yeah.
apparently.
Just need to double check your copy and paste.
You feel like
No,
You
the-
watching this, Richard?
yeah, he's not being nice today.
No, I'll tell you.
Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations.
Okay, and
That's 4 through 5.
then Galatians 1, 15. and 16.
Okay, well,
I
I didn't know I was reading. Oh wait, Galatians. I already have that.
That's in the New Testament.
I already got that marked. Okay, 15 through 16. That's right here. But when he who had set me apart before I was born, and who called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son to me in order that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately consult with anyone. Okay.
Yeah. See the similarities there? I think that's really exciting to see. You know, God is sovereignly involved in proclaiming His word to the nations. He chose Jeremiah. He chose Paul. And in some form or fashion, He's chosen every single one of us. We may not go to, preach to multiple nations. We may not preach to thousands of people like Paul did. But are you preaching to your neighborhood? Are you preaching to your coworkers? Are you preaching to the people that God has placed you near? Hayden's gone to Columbia, right? There are people there that he's preached to and ministered to, right? So the bottom line is wherever we have been placed, it isn't accidental that we're there, right? It is intentional. God has set us up, and then we kind of wigs us out a little bit when we kind of think about it. It's kind of staggering, right? That God before the world was even formed, God had in mind. Ephesians 2:10 says that that we were prepared for good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Prepared in advance. In other words, before we even knew Him, before we were even born, we were set apart to do these things. And this is Jeremiah, this is Paul, this is you, this is me. Again, what is that calling? Who are those people? Well, the people that He's placed you here. And if we view things as with a look towards God's sovereignty, then we take it more seriously, I think, about what we're actually doing. Right? This is more than just. I guess I go to that church in Monongahela, so I guess we got to do stuff for the community. Or how about God has sovereignly called us to bring the gospel to the lost? Like, this is a difference in perspective. And so when you begin to think, God has set me apart before He formed me in the womb, He knew me and consecrated me to do what He's calling me to do. That's exciting. We are not just random accidental people. We are called by God. God's sovereignly at work. You're not even accidentally in this room. You think about it. And, if you start thinking about at the very time of history that you were brought into this world, the fact that you were born here in this country and not in a different country, the fact that somebody, now for many of us here in this room, it was probably a parent or family member, somebody brought you to church, or maybe you went to VBS, or whatever. Robin Yohe, I think about this. He went to a Billy Graham crusade in Pittsburgh. Everybody else can think maybe of a different story, right? But the fact that you heard the gospel, was that just accidental? You just accidentally happened to be somewhere where the gospel was preached, or God sovereignly brought that message to you through someone that He had prepared in advance to do exactly that, knowing that all of these things, all of these things in place are not just random occurrences. These are God sovereignly working and bringing the gospel to you. What an awe-inspiring and humbling thing that is. That the message of the gospel has come to us and we have heard it and responded. Pretty powerful. And it's exciting to read these accounts in both the Old and New Testament, but it's also exciting to think about our own personal experience and how God reached out to us. Did you have something you wanted to say, Christian? You just had that look. No?
Nope, just have that look.
Okay. Change your look. Keep changing.
Change back.
Do a different one. All right. Now read Mark 6, 1 through 3. On what basis do the people from Jesus' hometown reject His teaching and preaching, and how might Paul be sharing in the sufferings of Jesus, even as he defends himself against the Judaizers? Let's read Mark 6, 1 through 3. Who would I bet you Kaylee would read that, and she'd even do it nicely.
He went away from there and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue. And many who heard him were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hand?" Okay. Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and
Joseph.
Joseph, thank you, and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him.
Okay. So, on what basis do the people from Jesus' hometown reject His teaching and preaching?
I just seen him as another person who was from the hometown.
Yeah,
Some
carpenter's
kid from the
son.
neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. It couldn't possibly be the Son of God.
No.
Yeah.
And so, how might Paul be sharing in the sufferings of Jesus, even as he defends himself against the Judaizers?
Yeah, isn't this the guy that used to persecute us?
Yeah, yeah. I want to close, if I have time. Nope, I do not have time. All right. I'll pick that up next time. There is